IP Stretch, 7 videos stretching you further on your IP journey. The topic for this video is needs, where we're going to get into some different area of science than triune that we do in the course. And the objective clearly for us, the task for us, is to look at this scenario where the presentation is one where you're trying to persuade or at least influence people in terms of what they're doing. And sometimes we can feel that should mostly come from logic, core ideas, the brilliance of our ideas. But let me give you a quote which tells us what we all know to be true, which is it's not as simple as that. Here is Winston Churchill, Prime Minister in the early 20th century, and here's a quote. "Man will occasionally stumble over the truth, but usually manages to pick himself up, walk over or around it, and carry on." Because persuasion is a tricky thing to get right. But in P&G, there's an area of science which many of us explore in depth, which helps us. And that is what we know about shopper and consumer behavior and a lot of the areas around behavioral sciences. There's a number of great books in this area. One of the famous ones is from Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. And the other one of my two big favorites is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. If you really want to look at these areas of behavioral sciences, behavioral economics, these are the two books I'd start with. And across their work, they cover a huge number of principles and around behavioral sciences, how people behave and respond in different places to different stimuli. We're not going to cover all of these. What we're going to do is look at 3 of them and actually see how we can take those core ideas and just think a little bit more clearly about how we choose to present when we need to persuade. But first, let's make sure we are absolutely grounded in the core aspects of behavioral sciences, which is often when we talk about brain 1 and brain 2. So here we go, brain 1 on the left, brain 2 on the right. We have here a brilliant picture of a plane. This is autopilot, and in case there's any doubt, that's a pilot in terms of a pilot's hat. And what we know from brain sciences, from neurosciences, from behavioral sciences, is the brain has 2 states. It has state 1, brain 1, where it is autopilot. Things are automatic. Things are intuitive. Things are fast. Things are responsive. Things feel easy. Things feel good. And the brain wants to stay there. The brain broadly wants to make 95% of its decisions as fast and as automatic as possible. But there is the second part of the brain, that is brain 2, that is the pilot. Sometimes the pilot gets involved and then it's very human. It's much more thinking things through. It is slower. It is more considered. It is more hard work for the brain. And only 5% of choices broadly are made through the pilot, i.e., for much of the time, the pilot is asleep. Now, for us as presenters, the truth is the same. For us as presenters, our audience often wants to stay in this state where everything is easy and everything flows and everything's nice and nothing changes very much. But if we're going to persuade, if we're going to change the way people think, we have to wake up the pilot. So in what ways can we do that? Well, this is where we get into some deeper behavioral sciences, and we're going to look at 3 principles. And this gets a little heavy, I warn you now, but it's worth it. So here are the 3, but let me set up the story. This is your audience. This is how they think. And what they're thinking is over here. They're thinking orange, good, blue, no, green, no. That is their preconceived idea as they come in and they listen to your brilliant presentation where what you're trying to convince them is, yes, orange is good, but so is blue and so is green. What does behavioral science tells us about how they're going to react? And we'll look at 3. We're going to look at confirmation bias, backfire effect, and the endowment effect. So let's explain the concepts one by one. Confirmation bias. This is the theory and the principle that the audience will accept the information which fits what they believe to be true already and ignore the rest. So here we have our friendly face. He's very happy as this information comes through. Blue is true. No, I'm going to ignore that. Orange is true. Ah, yes, I like that. In it goes. Green is true. Not interested in that. Green is true. Nope, still not interested. Blue is true. I'm going to ignore that. Orange is true. In it goes. We take in the information which confirms what we believed was true already. And this isn't conscious. It's not they're consciously ignoring these things. A lot of this is subconscious autopilot response. The next area we'll talk about is the backfire effect. And here is a little bit what can happen when you do switch on brain 2 and you say something it doesn't like very much. It can rebel. Unhappy face, top of head blowing up in explosion, because we have told them very clearly and very early that orange is bad and blue is good. No, that doesn't fit their preconceived idea. And actually the brain can rebel. The brain can go, nope, I'm just going to shut down. I'm not going to engage. I'm just going to refuse to even listen. Anyone who's worked with buyers in big retailers will know that this is a reaction you can just sometimes get. So that's the backfire effect. Third one is the endowment effect. And this principle is that if it's an idea coming from us, in this case the audience rather, from a person, as soon as they think it, or in this case articulate it, say it, they hugely overvalue, maybe not hugely, they do significantly overvalue that idea or that thing they've made. And we've all seen, I've seen my daughter walk into a room at the age of 5 with a beautiful drawing she's drawn, giving it to me as if she's just given me some fabulous painting worth millions of pounds. You can see it in her eyes, it's wonderful. It's a perfectly nice painting, but it doesn't have quite the value that she sees. And we have to admit, we're more like my 5-year-old daughter than we sometimes wish we were, in that we do the same thing. Confirmation bias, backfire effect, endowment effect, all fascinating in the way that people respond and think about things. But as presenters, what can we do with this information? Let's go through them. First one, confirmation bias. You're going to accept the information which agrees with you already and ignore the rest. As a presenter, how do we handle that? Well, what I found has worked in the past, talking to retailers, trading teams, is admitting some doubt. If I'm trying to sell an idea that I know they've got some reservations about, I will talk about some of those reservations myself. Or look, yes, I think orange is right. And actually, I thought that blue and green was wrong when I started to look at this business plan. But actually, here's some information which is making me think differently. Leaving it up to them how they may respond initially, but starting to show your own doubt. And clearly, through the communication, the presentation, the sell, you will become more certain of things as you draw them along. But start with some doubt. That's one option. Next one. When you're very much worried about the backfire effect, because here you're waking up brain 2, slowly admitting some doubt, but okay, how do I still make sure that I don't wake up brain 2, the pilot, too quickly? One thing is to avoid the backfire effect of them getting angry with what you're telling them, is to bring in puzzles or mysteries or things for them to solve. It's in small steps. Oh, I thought this, orange good, blue bad, but actually here's a piece of information which is challenging our thinking on that. And here's another piece of information, and here's something. What's this telling you? So, for example, when I used to present regularly into Asda Walmart, especially to an audience who I knew I was going to share some things which they would feel uncertain about, I would get them heavily involved in the data presentation. I would share a chart and I'd be getting them telling me what this data was meaning, what the numbers were saying, what they were expecting me to share and tell them about things. I'd make it feel like a puzzle, a mystery of things to work through. And finally, the endowment effect, where your audience, anything they come up with themselves, they strongly overvalue if you're not careful. Well, the thing here is, okay, there is things they're going to think and they're going to have strongly in their head, but as much as possible to connect to their own experiences, because in reality, we all have a number of experiences which actually pulls us in different places. So for in this example of orange, good, blue, bad, is at least look for experiences that they've had where maybe they've realized having an open mind meant they got to a better place. Or it is sometimes just broadening their experience out and getting them talking about other things. And it's amazing how that then takes them away from some of their preconceived. So for an example here, when almost the first thing I was taught in P&G when I first joined in sales was when you're getting into or setting up for a sell with someone at your customer, was to start with a question. How's business? Get them talking right from the outset. That relaxes them, it gets them sharing information you can value, but actually you get them talk broadly what's going on. It's amazing how they'll form their own links in a positive way to what you're saying. Confirmation bias, backfire effect, endowment effect. None of these three things are going to solve all problems when someone vehemently believes things you don't want them to. But all three of these will help you at least start to step you towards being able to persuade or at least influence people in terms of what they're doing. But I'll leave you with the final thought. In the end, what you really need to do, what behavioural science tells us, is if your audience just stays here, they won't change their thinking at all. If you want to influence someone, you've got to, in some way, switch on Brain 2, wake up the pilot.